Hey, Joe, as somebody who was between worlds, I mean, I was thinking about, all the British reptilian hustlers and Visigoths and things. And then you came over there from over there, but you...
I was Marco Polo.
What, heading east to discover spaghetti?
Yeah.
That figures, I guess. But do you think you had that gave you a different... you weren't in either, because you weren't a typical American manager, promoter type either. It's interesting. You seem to have kind of...
Well, I aspired, to be a reptilian hustler.
So you, inside, you were thinking Visigoth, sorry, take two. Visigoth, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's the perfect, you've set me up perfectly for my little interstitial here.
Great.
But I've also set you up by taking off my jacket, I've set you up for the moment where you put on your granny glasses.
Oh, I'll just have to go.
Oh, no, that's all right. You don't have to. Okay. No, but Robyn's point is right, that there was this... Does anybody play bridge here? There's a thing called cross-roughing, where you play the hand that's laid out, your partner has left down on the table, and you play their hand, and you kind of switch the lead back and forth from one side of the table to the other. And I kind of was doing that a little bit. I had this American approach about, I'd been through the Greenwich Village scene with Dylan going electric and all these things. And I came to England. I had none of this pure sense about folk music. I loved British folk music, but I didn't think it had to be protected and cosseted and kept separate from anything pop, And but I really did want to be a reptilian hustler, and I wanted to sign people like The Move and be like Tony Secunda. But I was far too well brought up and middle class to really pull that off. And so trying to sign these kind of rough, tough pop bands, I ended up falling for the band that was the kind of cornerstone, along with the incredible string band, of my Witch Season production company. I found them, I hired them to open for Pink Floyd one night at the UFO Club, which was this club in 1967, the underground club in London, the psychedelic club. And they, I was sort of bemused by them because they were English kids, but they wanted to be American. So it was sort of a mirror. And they were singing all these American singer-songwriter stuff. And I thought, it's a shame about the repertoire, but they're so talented. And then they announced in the middle of their first set at UFO, they announced they were going to do this song, this tune from the Butterfield album called East West, where Mike Bloomfield takes this kind of modal guitar solo, a big show-off number. And I thought, oh, that's a big mistake. Oh, no, please, not. And then the guitar player, the 17-year-old guitar player for this group, stepped forward and tore Mike Bloomfield to shreds. And that was Richard Thompson, and the group was Fairport Convention.
You don't have a tape of that, do you?
No, I don't, actually. We didn't do tape things like that. And the man who brought them to me at UFO, and who was their original manager, is actually in the audience tonight, John Penhallow. And so we made a couple of albums which sort of slowly edged into writing their own songs. Sandy Denny joined the group, her songs. Richard Thompson started writing songs, and they were building up. They made this wonderful third album called Unhalf-Bricking, which I thought was going to make them stars. And just between the completion of the album, I'd already set up an American tour for them, and just at that time, they had this terrible accident, and Martin Lamble, the drummer, was killed. And at first they thought they'd never play again. They'd never play together as a group. And then they began to come around to the idea of staying together. But they realized they'd have to have a completely new repertoire. They couldn't do the same stuff. They would never teach another drummer to play what Martin had played. And they were sort of groping for what approach they were going to take to this whole new reinvention of themselves. And there was one track on Unhalf Bricking which gave them a clue. And another thing that propelled them in this direction was the release that spring of Music from Big Pink by the band. That record hit London like a bomb. All the musicians in London had that record. And everybody was so intimidated and impressed by it, and particularly a group like the Fairport, you couldn't imagine them going back to make an American sort of style repertoire after that record, because they just sort of did it as well as it could be done. And
what did you think of Big Pink, Joe?
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
You didn't?
I liked about half of it.
Right.
But the stuff I thought weakest was the Dylan covers, but
right.
in a way that's what launched it. But
yeah, I suppose. But I mean, drummers would come into John Wood, the engineer I worked with the Sound Techniques, and say, I want my snare drum to sound like Levon Helm on Big. And John would say, you have to play it like Levon Helm. And anyway, so the track that gave them the blueprint to a new self was A Sailor's Life, which was a traditional British ballad that Sandy Denny had taught the group. And the way they played it was kind of opened a whole new can of worms. And they were the first ones to fish with those worms in the form of this record, Legion Leaf. And I think you all know this story of what happened. They made this incredible record. Everybody loved it. And then Sandy Denny left and formed Fotheringay. Ashley Hutchings left and formed Albion Band, and they became a touring band, and they went to America for the first time. And then eventually Richard Thompson left and became Richard Thompson. And the Fairport Convention goes on to this day, and they have this festival in Oxfordshire every year, which is huge, and they just keep going. They're incredible. But this kind of cross-roughing that happened of, me as an American trying to steer them away from American music and into British music, and then being intimidated by the band into really going in that direction. There was a wonderful footnote that happened, I heard 20 years ago or something, 20 years later. I ran into an English musician who knows the Fairport well. And he had been playing at a festival in Belgium. And he was on the same bill with Los Lobos. And during one of the breaks, David Hidalgo, the leader of Los Lobos, came up to him and he said, "You're from England, right?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know Fairport Convention?" He said, "Yeah, they're friends of mine." And Hidalgo said, "Well, if you see Fairport Convention, tell them thanks. Because if it wasn't for Legion Leaf, we'd be still in East Los Angeles playing heavy metal." And now I think, Robyn, that's your cue to give us a little taste of true Britishness, uninflected by America.